Hi you guys! Sorry, it's been a minute, hasn't it, since I've seen you last. I've been living my best life, or just enjoying the first 3 weeks of January, which quite frankly have thrown some massive curveballs. So I don't know if that's the same for you, but it certainly has been fun, and I'm using that in a sarcastic way. So I was kind of thinking, what could I do this video on? Because I've actually been really lacking some inspiration. Last week I did film a video, or was it 2 weeks ago? I can't remember. I've had an intense few weeks. I had a relative end up in hospital, so it was a little bit concerning, and that really took away a lot of my time and attention. But now I'm back on it like a carb on it. I didn't even know what that means. But yeah. So I was thinking, well, the video that I filmed 2 weeks ago was about what happened in America with the ICE shooting of, the leftist terrorist. And obviously I thought a lot of thoughts, and I said a lot of things, but I didn't actually feel comfortable sharing the video because I kind of feel like, I don't know, you have to be careful, I suppose, and I was articulating some very strong views, so I decided against it. So there's a whole video that's edited, ready to go, that I don't think I'm ever going to share, but you know what? That's my prerogative, isn't it? And it was a pretty heavy going video, and it was kind of comparing what's happening in America to Nazi Germany. So you can kind of imagine the tone of that video. So I didn't feel like I wanted to bring the world down in my despair. So it's been filed away for maybe another time, or to never see the light of day again, a bit like the Epstein files. Anyway, so what am I going to talk about? I actually had no inspiration before I pressed play or record, not press play, record on this filming. But it suddenly come to my mind, why are we being so nostalgic about 2016? What were the big trends of 2016? So 2016 was a decade ago, but obviously the older you get, decades kind of get shorter. At theory of relativity there, isn't it? I mean, when you're 5, decades is something you've not even experienced. But when you're 65, you've had a good few decades. And as you get older, those decades feel less. And I am of the ilk where, like, my God, it's been 10 years since 2016. And what was happening in 2016? Well, in the UK, Brexit was voted on, wasn't it? So there was a lot of campaigning about that in the summer of 2016. We were sort of pre-TikTok. TikTok wasn't a thing. Although social media was sort of ramping itself up, we were very much of the Vine, Tumblr kind of era, for those of you that remember it or on it. There was still peak festival culture. Coachella was still a very big thing, and we were all watching as people were wearing flower crowns, denim shorts, and living their best lives. Memes that were dumb but joyful. We were enjoying the memes, and we have been enjoying them for quite a long time, actually. So, yay, memes. And I suppose it felt like we weren't taking ourselves too seriously. I think in other videos I've talked about, for me, how 2012 was kind of like a really good year, and I felt like everything was kind of worse since 2012. As I've said, in the UK, we'd had in 2012 the Olympics. We were kind of proud to be British again. We pulled the whole shindig off. It was great. I suppose in 2011, we'd come off the royal wedding of Kate and William and the hope for the future royals. So I don't know, this kind of era, the 2010s, had a little bit more optimism about it than I would say 26 has. There is no optimism in 26, 3 weeks in. And apart from the Beckhams are serving. Thank you, Beckhams. We are really grateful that you have been able to unite a country and get Victoria Beckham back in the chart. I mean, the fact that she's the only Spice Girl to never not had a number one obviously really pulled on our heartstrings, and that typical British ironic humour that we have, or dry humour, has decided to put the Beckham in a position of importance and allow for Victoria to reach the top of the charts again. So, well done, Britain. I don't know what this is. I'm doing it. You're going to roll with it. This is going to be a fudgy, messy video, and you're just going to have to enjoy it, aren't you? Yay! So, 26 is probably the last good year. Would you agree with me? For me, I was in early parenthood. I was getting to grips with this whole new adult life that I'd suddenly found myself in. And it was kind of confusing and overwhelming. And to be fair, I think 2016 was a big sleepy blur for me as I was trying to sort of get through my life and adjust to things. But, you know, there's definitely some high points. I remember going to see a Bryan Adams gig. That was quite fun. I don't know if any of you who watch me know who Bryan Adams is, but it's kind of exciting. I started to go out again with friends a lot more because I just had my daughter, and so I was sort of getting back into figuring out who I was. The fashion was kind of nice. I think the skinny jean was still rocking around then. A lot of blazers. You know, we had a lot of shirts. I mean, I love a shirt, and I think the shirt is back for 2016, guys. 26, guys, I think it really is. So, yeah, there was all of that going on. So, I think 2016 represents those final moments. And I think it was the last year of slower pace. I think it was that last year before things started to speed up. It was kind of pre Amazon Prime and Alexa in the home. I think that wasn't until sort of 2018, 2017 when all that kind of stuff started off. So I just feel like it was, I suppose, the middle of the decade of the 2010s. And I feel like we'd sort of had that slower aesthetic, hadn't we? Things took a lot of time because the internet wasn't as fast. There were no stories on Instagram, for example. There was no TikTok. There was no like live chats on YouTube. Things were a lot slower, and it was this year, I think, where things started to really speed up. And I feel that life has just been getting progressively faster because of our ability to consume so much media so quickly, that we are just constantly in a barrage of information. And now in 26, we're also in a barrage of like threats. And also, you know, 2016, you know, it just felt like there was a big political shift, didn't it? It felt like things sort of took a bit of a turn, and I suppose that's kind of how we've ended up where we are today. So I'm going to go into it in a bit more detail. It's been really waffly, so thank you for staying with me so far. But let's sort of think about why we're so nostalgic for 26. Was it as good as we're remembering? Is it just rose tinted spectacles? Or is it that things just seem so grim and dire right now that we are just clinging on to the hopeful, optimistic era? Or, as I think it is, it's just that we are now all a couple of generations in to the internet, and that this is our way of being nostalgic. So let's have a think about that. Let's get to the bottom of it. Let's sort of just really get into 2026 vibes, 26 energy. So it was the year that I think stories was introduced to Instagram, if we're going to look at it through a social media lens. And I think it was the year that we were still kind of moving on from blogging and vlogging and moving into this sort of like stories era that kind of emerged on social media. So I think that started to sort of integrate. And I've talked about that faster pace of the internet. Politically, it was an interesting year, wasn't it? So I've talked about the aforementioned Brexit, which was a massive cultural shift here in the UK. I think it kind of really sets two generations against each other. The under 40s were very much wanted to stay in the European Union, and the over 40s that wanted out. And what was really ironic is that the generation who were over 40 had spent nearly 50 years in the European Union and therefore had had the benefits of it. But immigration became a real thing about that, and it became the only thing. It was the stupidest decision to base it purely on this fear of immigration. We've talked about how the UK is an island, and islands kind of fear people coming into them because of whatever reason, even though this island of Great Britain has been invaded several times by several people and is a constant flow of this. But hey, that's a different video for a different time. So Brexit, it was a seismic shift. And we're 10 years on from that, aren't we? And we can realise how rubbish it was and the problems that it caused. So I remember waking up the day after Brexit and sitting in the staff room of the school I was working in and with a couple of colleagues, and we were just absolutely shocked and devastated that this thing had happened. It also got a lot worse that year because it was our first round of Donald Trump as well. So that was another interesting pivotal change when Donald Trump became president. And globally, it was shocking. There's a lot of non-stop news. So we kind of know what's going on with him right now, don't we? So it was the beginning of all of that joy. There were lots of terror attacks in Europe, actually. So there was the aftermath of Paris, the Brussels bombings, there was a Nice attack. So Europe was, you know, dealing with this kind of terrorism situation that was kind of frightening and overwhelming. So is it the beginning of where we are now, maybe? And it was kind of the last few good things were happening just as the terrible things were starting to emerge. So yeah, there is that. So technology wise, I've just talked about, being online and like stories started. Pokemon Go. So summer 26 was the summer of Pokemon Go. Lots of people outside together, strangers talking, looking at things. That was like a big trend. Tumblr was at peak influence. We don't hear Tumblr, but I remember even then some of the pupils at school still being big Tumblr kids, and it was kind of influenced a lot of things. Twitter was still unhinged and funny. It wasn't called X, it was called Twitter, and it didn't become this dark place like it is today. That was kind of fun. It was not just rage and brands, which it is now, rage and brands. And I suppose it's that pre-algorithm. I mean, there was an algorithm, but now we're a slave to the algorithm, aren't we? And memes were communal, and the internet was less branding and monetizing, although this was emerging. And I do remember, because I was an early parent, the mummy vlogger, the mummy YouTuber, and the parent influencer was a real big thing for that point of my life. And I remember clinging desperately and being in awe and amazed that there were so many people I could watch who had children same age as my daughter, and learn from them. And and I found some really cool people like the Mumsy Mum. I maybe found them in 2015 actually, but either way, this was kind of what was going on then, and it was useful for me as a millennial parent to be able to tap into that. So the music of the era, so it was Beyonce's Lemonade album, so we saw different sides to Lemonade, and a lot of the jokes were it was the first time that white America realized that Beyonce was black. So that was kind of fun. Rihanna, Drake, Kanye was The Life of Pablo, and Adele was dominating with 25. So again, there was a lot of big artists, which was great. It was kind of a quiet era for Taylor as well. She wasn't kind of around as much that year. And peak festival colours, as I said, Coachella Core was massive. And remembering watching, the Coachella kind of aesthetic be all over kind of social media. Ooh, I always say kind of, and a lot. Just try and spot how many times you see them in one of my videos. I did say in one of my other videos we should make a drinking game out of it, but if you did that, you would be destroyed, because I say it all the time. So what was happening in TV and film? Well, it was a year Marvel was still going strong. I mean, Marvel's been going pretty strong for most of the 2010s into the 2020s. And I suppose Stranger Things, that was the first year it was on. I remember watching Stranger Things and thinking it was amazing. And I was obviously the demographic that was going to really appeal to, because I grew up watching X-Files and The Goonies and E.T. And the Stranger Things series kind of blended all of this 80s nostalgia together. And I really loved that. I thought it was great. So, and I remember it was an instant cultural phenomenon. And I remember talking to people about it, and I was like, have you watched it? And that theme tune was just amazing. Again, thought that was great. Game of Thrones was still kind of happening. People were still very much watching that, and it was before it kind of got a bit disappointing and it didn't end the way everybody wanted it to. Fleabag came on, so that was the first series of Fleabag, which, as we said, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, chef's kiss, and sort of representing a different type of female, and a different kind of stance on what it was to be a woman in Britain, and to kind of not have you together and not be okay. So yeah, that was a really good series. Fashion wise, as I said, skinny jeans. So it was less curated, but we were getting people posting outfits of the day and stuff. That's been going on for a while, but I think it was more about sharing an outfit rather than it was kind of being a brand that was promoting. And it wasn't as much about wearing clothes that you'd been gifted. It was more about, this is what I'm wearing, this is how I wear it. And there was a kind of genuineness to it that I think we kind of have lost, because now everyone's influencing everyone and everyone's selling stuff. The internet is basically a big place to sell us stuff, because, as I've said, it comes back to late stage capitalism, and the internet has kind of ruined it for all of us. And another really big thing about 2016 was the year of the celebrity death. My God, everybody freaking died this year. So I think it started off with David Bowie. Prince died. I mean, these were people that we didn't expect to be dying. We thought we'd get a few more years with them, and it was really shocking. Muhammad Ali, Alan Rickman, he died, Oh, name? And Carrie Fisher, who was in the middle of like refilming, you know, the Star Wars kind of films that had sort of kick-started again in 2015. So absolutely, it was harrowing, some of these celebrities, and it was like the year of the icon death, wasn't it? So why do we think right now that 2016 is sticking so much? Well, obviously those things are happening, and maybe they're in a lot of people's minds because they can kind of remember it. As I've said about maybe the age that some of us are, late 30s, early 40s, late 40s, early 50s, we kind of really remember it well because 10 years goes by so quickly now for us. Whereas I suppose when you were younger, you know, 10 years is a rite of passage. So if you were 26 in 2016 or 16 in 2016, you're now 26 and 36. And maybe that's your first decade that you remember, which I think links back to what I've just said about, you know, the generations being on the internet. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail a bit later on. So it was also pre-pandemic. Do you remember that pre-pandemic era? Do you remember the pandemic? Fun. Pre-algorithm burnout. I think we're about to have a massive switch off, or we're going to change how we're consuming media. I can see this coming. I can see that even in Britain, we're gearing up for like a social media kind of restrictions on our under 16s, a bit like they've been doing in Australia. So it's going to be interesting to see how that transpires this year. There is this early political polarization. So maybe it's beginning of when the cracks are starting to form. So this is why this is a year that we're kind of looking at. And there was still a lot of chaos on social media. It was kind of unregulated. It was fun. Zoella was kind of getting big. Do you remember Zoella? And we had like the Brit Pack, was it? And, you know, this was a very big sort of social media becoming more of what it was today and less of what it used to be like. And that makes no sense unless you understand what I mean. So that was what was going on in 2016. You know, you might remember things as well. Feel free to drop a comment below if you've got a particular stance on this. But that was 2016. Said before, I've been on the internet for a really long time, and you might have been on the internet for a really long time. And I do feel like part of my videos and Quirky British Female is that we are starting to kind of look at social history through the lens of the internet. That kind of feels where some of my content lands. You know, there's that, you know, again. So the big shift, the internet now has a memory, doesn't it? I've been on the internet since the 90s. So I've been on it maybe longer than some people have been alive. And that is a very brand new thing, isn't it? Because 50 years ago, the internet was not what it was. The World Wide Web didn't exist until 1990. And then obviously it really took off in the early 90s. But I think most people were sort of adopting it in the early 2000s. And then smart technologies really taken hold of it. So we can be online and living on the internet quite considerably. And for me, I've been on, you know, social media for 20 years. That's a long time to have been on 20 years. That means there's 2 decades under my belt. So I can go on to my Facebook and see pictures of me from 20 years ago. That's really easy for me to do. I can go on to my Instagram and I can see what I was up to 10 years ago. That is it. I have got now a life. I have a digital footprint. And I think that now we're in 2026, most people can remember 2016 because that digital footprint is there for most people. Even my daughter, who's Gen Alpha, and my son, who's Gen Alpha, they would be able to track themselves on the internet because of images that I've taken and put on there of them, or that their dates of birth have been logged on, like, you know, I became a parent on this day, on my photo albums that I've uploaded onto my social media showing my children. So there is now a whole generation of people that can really look back in a way that generations before them haven't been able to do. So when I was in 1996, I wasn't able to look back at 1986 in the same way that somebody in 26 can look back at 2016. That is now something that we have privilege to experience. So for millennials, we are the internet adolescents. We were on the internet and we've evolved and changed and become part of this milieu, haven't we? So we remember logging off. We had phases that actually weren't as documented as younger people have. So I think in the last 10 years, everything has been on the internet, hasn't it? You know, your wedding photos will be on the internet. As I just said, your first child, your second child will be on the internet. getting proposed to will be on the internet. Leaving high school is on the internet. Graduating is on the internet. Getting your first job is on the internet. Your profiles might reflect that. Your LinkedIn, your Snapchat, your Instagram, like the internet is basically everything. So we can actually look back really easily and see what we were doing 10 years ago. And I think that's kind of why 2016 is really kind of pulling us this year. I mean, we weren't doing this last year. We weren't going, 2015, what was happening in 2015, in 25, but it suddenly seems like we are. And I suppose I even started this year by doing that 1986 26 what's changed in dating video. I mean, go and find it, you might really like it. And I suppose that's because I was tapping into a nostalgia, wasn't I? Maybe that's it. Maybe this is the year of nostalgia. Maybe we'll all realize how horrific things are and we just want to look back. But we can't go back. We have to move forward. And I'm pretty certain that we'll end up in a better place. But that doesn't make it any easy for us to kind of endure, does it? So online identity was experimental 20 years ago and it didn't feel permanent, whereas now it is permanent. Whereas Gen Z, who are the internet natives, they've really been on the internet and grown up and thrived on the internet. They grew up inside platforms. There's a lot of identity politics, humor, and relationships that are formed online. They've been more willing to be online and maybe more confident exposing themselves online than maybe we were as millennials. Everything is archived and screenshot and algorithm ranked in a way that in the noughties, the internet didn't enable us to be. Internet wasn't as an escape, which it was for me in the noughties. It was more of I have to be online in order to connect. It was the reality of the world that people found themselves in. And this is again now happening to Gen Alpha and maybe in more of an extent than it did for Gen Z. For Gen Z then, which I think is where this trend has emerged, and it is Gen Z that are feeling that nostalgia. Because let's bear in mind, Gen Z are turning 30. They are now about to be 30 because 1996 is that transition year, isn't it? So 1996 was the year of the first Gen Zs being born. So they are turning 30. And I think it all changes. We're no longer looking at millennials as the bright young things because they are raising kids, burnt out, miserable, anti-establishment almost. And it's Gen Z now that we're all looking at as they emerge into this full adulthood. Because I kind of feel that 30 is the new age of adulthood, isn't it? You can be a grown up from 18, but I think to be an adult when your frontal lobe is really fully developed, it's 30. But feel free to argue and challenge me on that one. That's kind of interesting. So they were too young to kind of remember the fun, sillier internet that the millennials had, but they do vaguely remember it because it was probably the formative years that they spent on the internet. So as I've said, they were 20, they were teenagers 10 years ago. That was what it was for them. And then Gen Alpha, so they're born into recommendation engines. They kind of have the internet constructed for them. They haven't maybe had the choice that Gen Z and millennials had in how they kind of utilize the internet. And they obviously constantly being reminded what's happening in their past. And they love looking back on their past. They love looking back on their birthdays. They love being able to see themselves as babies and saying their first words because that all exists in Gen Alpha's world. And the archived chaos becomes aesthetic and it becomes trends and it becomes fun. And so even Gen Alpha, like my daughter can see herself from 10 years ago. She can see those images of herself. She can see herself singing happy birthday from 10 years ago to her auntie. She can see photos of holidays that she's taken and videos of her chatting. That is a whole world for her. So even 10 years ago can be nostalgic for her in a way that it just wasn't for me or maybe Gen Z. Gen Z, I'm British, I keep doing this. Anyway, so it's just an interesting take, isn't it? So 2016 was the last era before permanent identity. So 2018, I think, was the big year of shift, to be fair. I think it became more about being a brand on the internet. And we hear this now about having a brand. Like, what exactly is a brand? You're a person. You have a personality and an identity. Cancel culture started to solidify in 2018. Algorithms punished experimentation. Like, you can't grow in the same way. You have to use these keywords, you have to do this, you have to do that. It's all very contrived and very controlled. So can you ever really get the information that you want? I'm getting a lot of AI slop these days. There's also another video in that you can watch. I don't want to watch AI slop. I do not want to watch young Drew Barrymore looking up at old Drew Barrymore, today's Drew Barrymore. I don't need that in my life. I don't care about that. That is not the nostalgia that I need in my life. So sod that off. Thank you. So you could reinvent yourself in the past. That I don't think you can now. There was no receipts, were there? I was a hot mess in the noughties, but I don't think anyone's going to see it. And I've just got some nicely curated, Facebook albums with silly names on that kind of show the fun and the chaos of it. I mean, the drunken photo album, does that still exist anymore? Are you doing that, Gen Z? Are you? Or are you just with your matcha latte and your gym leggings being a certain type of person? Yeah, we could post impulsively without career consequences. I mean, yeah, we're kind of being policed by our own social media profiles. So maybe that's again where this nostalgia is coming from. And two generations actually are grieving different things. So for millennials, we miss not being watched or studied or scrutinized. We miss smaller audiences. Kind of think about the intimacy of that, the joy that we used to have. There was no strategy. It was just being on the internet and being experimental and being fun and being creative. And it was free and it was liberating. However, Gen Z misses the idea of that authenticity. I think that's a really big point here. Where's the authenticity gone from the internet? I don't want brands. I don't want curated. I don't want other human beings to think they need to sell a version of themselves for me to be invested in them. I genuinely don't. In fact, I think that I like people that are a bit messy and chaotic. I think we need to see more mess and more chaos. I mean, the world is showing us mess and chaos, isn't it? Politically, we are watching mess and chaos. We're watching destruction. This is the chaos era. Let's go back there. Let's go back to being free and experimental and less serious. Let's go back to that. Maybe that's what we're being told here. Maybe the chaos of all the politics and stuff is like, yeah, let's get off the internet. Ironically, that I'm filming this video and you're watching it on the internet. But do you get what I mean? Let's just go out in the real world and do some real world stuff and not be so, chained to whatever this is. Let's live in the real world. So communal chaos in humor that wasn't optimized or moralized. Everything's offensive now, isn't it? Everyone has to be careful what they say. I see this in my job. Young people, everything's mean. Is it mean? Or is somebody just telling you something you don't want to hear? Like, I don't want to hear that my hair looks bad, but even I can see it does today. I don't like to hear that bad things about the world that's going on, but I'm hearing them, and we have to grow up a little bit. It's okay to be a flawed, messy person. Yeah, I think that's kind of what we're trying to say here. So there's a weird psychology overlap. So let's have a quick talk about that. I have filmed the ending to this video twice. This is the third time. The first time, chef's kiss. The second time, I didn't think I could replicate it, but I did. I think I even exceeded it. It was probably chef's kiss. And now we know, third time lucky, it'll just be really mediocre and my souffle will fall flat. But we'll see. The internet, 2016 nostalgia trend. Is it about the 2016 nostalgia trend? No, I don't think it is. I think it's a weird psychological overlap because it isn't about youth and it's not remembering being that age. It doesn't feel like it's about remembering that age because we've got this weird overlap, haven't we? We've got millennials who were teenagers on the internet. We have Gen Z that were kids and teenagers on the internet. We've got Gen Alpha that were kids on the internet. And we're all together doing this weird blended digital life. So there's a whole generation of Gen X and Boomer, Millennial, and now entering their adult years, Gen Z. And we're all kind of in this weird space together and have our different kind of references, but it's kind of homogenized itself somewhat. And we're all kind of just feeling really exhausted with the internet. We are over it. I think we have got to that point. The excitement, the enthusiasm, the Wild Westness, to make a metaphor about how the internet used to feel, that's all gone, and it's become an algorithm. It's called branding. It's called, cancel culture. It's too much of restriction now. It isn't fun. It tells us things we don't want to know anymore. It shows us things we don't want to see. And it's become identity rigidity. We kind of feel like we're cultivating a sense of self that doesn't really exist in the real world. And we can't always marry it up online either. And a sense that the internet has kind of hardened us and become more difficult and less fun. That's the word, isn't it? It's less fun. That's a phrase, not words, actually. So people reach for 2016 because it represents the plasticity. We remember it being more fun and more relaxed and less contrived, less algorithm dominant, less cancel culture. There was a lot more fun on it. Do you remember that big group selfie from the Oscars? Everybody was on and it broke the internet. Do you remember when you could break the internet? And now it's just not possible, I don't think. So yeah, I think that's what we're talking about. So what is the deep, unsettling truth here? So it might be our first nostalgia cycle. And I've explained how we've arrived at the nostalgia cycle. But it isn't nostalgia for youth. It's nostalgia for habit and behaviors that we can't have on the internet anymore. It's not about youth. It's about the freedom on the internet that we've lost and that we can't ever get back. And I think that's what it is. So it's not that I was younger, but I was free, I was authentic. I could exist online without being constantly evaluated. It was just a completely different time period. And I think that's what this 2016 trend has been all about. That's what we've been trying to do. So that's a huge thing, isn't it? To wind this up, where do we go from here? Well, there's kind of two pathways, I think. The first pathway is to just keep retreating into nostalgia aesthetics. And is it, 2017 when we're doing this and 2013 when we were doing this, and looking back, even though we're in the middle of a decade, we're not looking back at the start of a decade, we're looking back at the middle of a decade, because time seems to have lost all meaning and our habits and behaviors now have become really odd on the internet. So it could be more of that. But I actually think it's the second thing that we're going to see. And the second thing is a deliberate push towards different internet habits, different online habits, smaller communities, more privacy, semi-offline spaces, a group chat, newsletters, Discord, closed communities. I actually think we're going to change our habits. We don't want to be sold to anymore. We don't want to be kind of told how to be, and we don't want this seriousness. I think we want a little bit of that fun and that energy. And I think we're already seeing it. I think we are over the internet. I think we are seeing people, Gen Alpha go back to landlines. We're seeing Gen Z have digital cameras instead of being like taking pictures with phones. We're seeing vinyl back to being sold successfully since before, it hasn't been sold selling successfully since 1990. So that really didn't come out very well, did it? Anyway, but I think we are starting to be nostalgic because we just want to hark back to previous ways of being. And it isn't about youth and remembering what we were doing. It was probably remembering a time when there was a bit more freedom. And I think we're coming to the end of the internet era. And I don't mean like you're going to be, I don't think we're going to be more immersed in the internet, but I just think it all comes together, doesn't it? It's all sort of making us feel that we want to be different. And I feel different at the start of 26. I feel like I'm going to make different choices. I'm not going to be on the internet in the same way that I have been. I don't want to doom scroll. I don't want to be sold at. I don't want to watch adverts all the time. I actually want to engage with different things. I'm going to read more books. I'm going to buy a newspaper, physical paper. I'm going to go on more walks. I'm going to enjoy spending time with people at home and invite people to my house in real interaction and not just crazy interaction that's online. So I don't know whether that's just me, but that's kind of where I'm at. So let me know your thoughts. As always, do you agree with this? Do you think that we are nostalgia for the freer internet that we used to have? Or do you actually think it is about youth? Do you think it is about, the fact that we've got two generations that have grown up on the internet now and that's how we look at the past. This is how we judge ourselves, and this is how we measure ourselves. Or do you think we're just trying to remember an era that felt freer and happier? Loads of things I've kind of talked about in this video, and I haven't really been very clear on my threads, I don't think, but hopefully you understand what I'm trying to say. So that's it for me for today. Please let me know what you think. Tell me what you were doing in 2016. Tell me if you think you've been online too much. Tell me if you've changed any of your habits recently. Are you nostalgic for our past? Is this a past that doesn't exist, maybe? I don't know. Are we looking at things through rose-tinted spectacles? These are just big questions that I'm putting out here on the internet. So that's all for me. I'm really hoping that the mic has recorded this. The green light's still on, so that's okay, isn't it? But thank you for taking your time to watch this, and I look forward to seeing you next time. So, ta-ta for now. Bye.